In the operating room, his hands were legendary, precise, controlled, the kind of surgical precision that other surgeons watched in silence because there was nothing useful left to add. He was considered, by his peers, by the literature, by the patients who had flown in from 4 different countries specifically to see him, one of the finest plastic surgeons in the state of Florida. But what happened when those hands left the operating theater? When the scrubs came off and the night began and Miami opened up in all its excessive, glittering possibility? That was a story nobody in that hospital had fully seen yet. Until the morning it came to find them. Welcome to corporate chaos scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing is off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like, because we bring you stories like this every week. His name is Dr. Elliott Raines, board-certified plastic surgeon, based in Miami, Florida. 43 years old at the time this story begins, which means he has been a practicing surgeon for 14 years and a name in his field for at least 10 of them. He trained at Johns Hopkins. His surgical residency was described by the director of his program at the time as the most technically gifted he had supervised in 20 years. He specialized in reconstructive and aesthetic surgery, the full spectrum, from complex post-trauma reconstruction to the high-end cosmetic procedures that his Miami clientele specifically sought him for. He was particularly known for rhinoplasty and facial reconstruction. Colleagues referred to his cartilage work with the specific admiration that surgeons reserve for technical feats that feel to the observer like something between engineering and art. His private practice, Raines Aesthetic Surgery, operated from a boutique clinic in Coral Gables, the kind of clinic where the waiting room has better furniture than most people's sitting rooms, and the staff know your name before you arrive. The waiting list for a consultation was 6 months. The fees were what you would expect from a surgeon of his reputation and his postcode. He had a partnership arrangement with a major Miami hospital for procedures that required their facility and their infrastructure, which gave him access to their surgical teams, their anesthesiology department, and their recovery resources. By any external measure, Dr. Elliott Raines had built exactly the career that 14 years of the most demanding professional training in the world had prepared him to build. The colleagues respected him. The patients trusted him. The hospital valued the partnership. He lived in a house that suited his success. He drove a car that suited the house. He was, in every visible way, exactly who he appeared to be. The gap between the visible and the actual had been widening for approximately 10 months before anyone outside a very small circle began to notice. And in those 10 months, Dr. Raines had become very practiced at making sure the visible was the only thing anyone saw. Miami, at a certain level of success and social access, is a city that operates on a different clock to most places. The evening begins later. The night extends further. The energy available at midnight, at 2 a.m., at 4, exists at a pitch and a temperature that is difficult to find in most other cities, and that, for a person with the right access and the wrong judgment, can become the most compelling thing in their week. Elliott had been in Miami for 11 years. He had been going out occasionally for most of them. Dinners, events, the social obligations and pleasures of a successful professional in a city that offers both with generous frequency. Nothing that had ever, in the first 8 years, created any interference with his work. He was a surgeon. He understood the stakes of impairment. He had colleagues who had made that particular mistake, and he had watched those careers carefully enough to understand exactly what the consequences looked like. He had been careful. For 8 years he had been careful. Somewhere around 42, the careful began to slip. Not in a dramatic moment, not a single decision, in increments. The social circle expanded to include people whose approach to a weeknight was qualitatively different from his own. The substances were present in these circles in the way that they are present in certain social environments. Not mandatory, not absent, simply available, and then familiar, and then something he was making active choices about, rather than passive ones. He had a group, a rotating, partially overlapping social constellation of people, some colleagues, some clients, some people he had met once at a party and continued to encounter, who moved through Miami's higher-end nightlife circuit with the easy fluency of people who had made it their natural habitat. Private members' clubs, rooftop gatherings, parties in apartments with views that made you feel, at 2 a.m, like the city was a personal possession. He was not sleeping until 4 a.m., sometimes 5. He was operating at 7:30. This is a gap of 2.5 hours. Across 10 months, compounded by what he was consuming during those nights, 2.5 hours of sleep is not 2.5 hours of sleep. It is something functionally different. Something his body was processing in a way that was, month by month, accumulating a deficit that his performance in the operating room had not yet fully reflected. His scrub nurse, Carmen Reyes, had been working with Elliott for 6 years. She had seen him at his best, the focused, brilliant, utterly present version that his reputation was built on. She had also, in the past 4 months, begun to see something else. Subtle things, things that someone less experienced and less observant might not have caught. The slightly elevated heart rate she noticed when she monitored vitals at scrub-in, the occasional imprecision in the first 10 minutes of a procedure that he always corrected by minute 15. The way he sometimes needed the overhead lighting adjusted in a way she had never needed to accommodate before. She had said nothing to anyone. She had positioned herself in every procedure to compensate if compensation became necessary. She had done this out of the particular loyalty that builds between a surgeon and a scrub nurse over years of working together at high intensity. The loyalty that says, I will protect you, even while I am watching you make choices that put you at risk. She was also keeping notes. She had not told Elliott that. The surgery that changed everything was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning. A rhinoplasty, a procedure Elliott had performed, by his own subsequent count, somewhere in excess of 400 times. Not a simple case. Rhinoplasties almost never are, the nose being the most structurally and aesthetically complex feature on the human face, but well within his competence. On his best day, it would have been a standard morning. The patient was Diane Marchetti, 34 years old, a marketing director from Fort Lauderdale who had wanted this surgery for 3 years, had researched surgeons for 8 months, had chosen Dr. Raines specifically after reviewing his published case studies, his peer-reviewed contributions to surgical literature, and the testimony of 3 previous patients she had found and spoken to independently. She had saved for this. She had organized her leave carefully. She had done everything right. Elliott had been at a private gathering until 3:15 a.m. He had slept for 4 hours, which was not the worst night he had had in the past 10 months, which is itself a statement about the 10 months. He had taken something to function by 6 a.m. that had worn off before he scrubbed in, leaving him in the grey zone, not dramatically impaired, not at his best, in the middle ground that he had been living in for months and had learned to move through. 37 minutes into Diane's surgery, he made an error. It was not the kind of error that triggers emergency responses. It was not visible to anyone in the room in the moment it occurred. It was a structural miscalculation in the cartilage architecture of the nasal tip, a cut that went a fraction of a millimeter further than the plan required, compromising a load-bearing structure in a way that would not manifest immediately, but would, over the days that followed, cause the surrounding tissue to behave in ways that no post-operative plan accounted for. He completed the surgery. He scrubbed out. He reviewed his notes. Everything in the documentation looked correct. He drove home. He slept for 11 hours. He did not acknowledge, even to himself, what had happened. Diane's post-operative experience began to diverge from the expected pattern at approximately 46 hours. The pain exceeded what the management protocol was designed for. The swelling was asymmetrical, in a way that her recovery nurse flagged, but attributed initially to individual variation. She called the clinic. She was advised on pain management and told to rest. By day 4, the asymmetry had worsened rather than stabilized. Her husband drove her to the emergency room. The hospital that received her conducted imaging. The structural issue was clear on the scan. The on-call surgical team identified what they were looking at and contacted the Raines Clinic's hospital partnership liaison within the hour. The following morning, a surgical review board convened to examine the procedure notes alongside the current imaging. They produced a report. The report identified the error. The report was provided to Diane's legal team within 48 hours of the hospital receiving it. Diane sued. She was entirely within her rights to do so. Her legal team valued the claim at $7 million. The hospital opened an internal investigation. The investigation was not limited to the specific procedure. It asked a broader question. What had the operating environment in the Raines Clinic's partnership procedures looked like in the past 12 months? Carmen Reyes was the first person interviewed. Carmen told the truth. She had always been going to tell the truth. She had been keeping notes specifically because she understood. At some level, she had not fully examined until the investigator sat across from her that she might one day be asked these questions and that her answer was going to need to be accurate rather than loyal. She described what she had observed: the arrival times, the presentation at scrub-in, the pattern of the subtle imprecision in the first minutes of procedures, which she had always seen correct itself, but which should not have required correction. The adjustments she had made to compensate, the light adjustments, the instrument placements, the way she had positioned herself to be closest to the patient if intervention became necessary. She cried once during the interview, not when describing Elliott's behavior, when describing Diane's case, because Carmen had been in that room. She had seen it happen, and she had thought, in the moment, that she had managed it, that the correction had come in time. She had been wrong, and she had spent the days since the hospital called with Diane's imaging understanding exactly what her silence had and had not prevented. Other staff were interviewed. A junior anesthesiologist described an interaction at scrub-in that he had found concerning but had not reported because he was junior and Dr. Raines was Dr. Raines. An OR scheduling nurse described pattern changes in surgical booking behavior that, in retrospect, she recognized as someone managing their availability around impairment rather than around capacity. The picture assembled. The Florida Board of Medicine was notified. Elliott's attorney reached him on a Thursday morning. He said, "Elliott, I need you in my office within the hour. Do not go to the clinic. Come directly here." Elliott sat across from his attorney, a man named Richard Greer, who had handled medical malpractice defense for 22 years and who had seen a great many things in those years, and listened to Richard lay out the shape of what was coming with the precision of a surgeon doing something analogous to what Elliott himself did with complex cases. Here is the structure. Here is the damage. Here is what we have to work with. The investigation, the Carmen testimony, the additional staff accounts, the Board of Medicine notification, the malpractice claim, the likely findings if this went to a formal board hearing without any mitigating action. Elliott said, quietly, "How bad?" Richard said, "If you walk into that board hearing without having done something significant and verifiable, you lose your license. Permanently. That's not a prediction. That's an assessment." Elliott looked at the window. The Miami sky was clear and blue and entirely indifferent. He said, "What does significant look like?" Richard said, "Inpatient rehabilitation. Not a weekend program. Not outpatient therapy. Residential. A recognized facility. You go in voluntarily before the hearing, and you document it. You walk into that hearing with 60 days of inpatient treatment behind you and a documented commitment to ongoing accountability. That changes the question from, is this person still a danger, to is this person taking genuine corrective action? Those are two different questions, and they have two different answers available to the board. Elliott said, "I need to call someone first." He called his parents. He is from Cincinnati. His father picked up on the second ring. He told his father everything. His father was very quiet for a long time, and then said, "When do you go in?" Elliott said, "I'm going to call the facility as soon as we hang up." His father said, "Good. Call us when you're checked in." He hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he called the facility. He spent 60 days in a residential treatment center in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had expected to find it intolerable, the structure, the group sessions, the absence of privacy, the enforced honesty of an environment where the performance of fine was not only useless, but actively counterproductive. He did not find it intolerable. He found it, after the first 10 days of profound resistance, something closer to necessary. The structure revealed, by contrast, how thoroughly unstructured the previous 10 months had actually been. The group sessions required him to say, out loud and to other people, things he had been successfully not saying to himself. The enforced honesty stripped away, layer by layer, the architecture of normalization he had built around his own behavior. He told a group in week 4 that the strangest part of the whole descent was that he had never experienced it as crisis. He had experienced it as enjoyment, as release, as the life that success entitled him to have. The danger had not felt like danger. It had felt like the reward for 14 years of extraordinary discipline. Someone in the group said, "That's the most dangerous kind. The kind that feels like you've earned it." Elliott thought about that for a long time. He thought about Carmen, about the notes she had kept, about the 6 years she had spent beside him in operating rooms, trusting that the best version of him was the version making the decisions. He thought about Diane, whose face he had held in his hands, with all the care he was capable of, and who had woken up from that surgery to something other than what she deserved. He thought about those things every day for 60 days. He has thought about them, in varying degrees, every day since. The Board of Medicine hearing took place 6 weeks after Elliott completed his program. He arrived with Richard, with his treatment documentation, with the program director's formal assessment of his progress and commitment, and with a written statement from Carmen Reyes, the longest, most carefully constructed document she had ever produced, that did 2 things simultaneously: provided a full and honest account of what she had witnessed, and spoke to the Elliott Raines she had worked beside for 6 years before those 10 months, and expressed her professional opinion that the man who had walked into that facility was capable of becoming that person again. The board suspended his license for 18 months. They attached conditions to reinstatement, mandatory random testing, a supervising physician for the first 12 months of return to practice, quarterly board check-ins, and a formal requirement to participate in a medical professional wellness program for a minimum of 2 years. These were not light conditions. They were not meant to be. Elliott agreed to every one of them. He did not ask for a single modification. He used the 18 months differently than he had used time in a long time. He studied. He read. He attended surgical conferences as a participant rather than a presenter. He became reacquainted with the literature of his field at a depth that the busyness of a successful practice had not always allowed. He volunteered, with board approval, at a free clinic on Tuesday mornings, minor procedures, wound care, the unglamorous end of the medical spectrum, and found that he had missed the simple work of helping without the weight of reputation attached to it. He returned to practice 18 months later. Carmen asked to stay. He told her he did not feel he had the right to expect that. She told him that expecting and deciding were different things, and that she had decided. She has been beside him in every procedure since his return. He does not work past 6 p.m. He is in bed by 10. He has not attended a club or a party or a social gathering that involves anything that was present in his life during those 10 months. He has a sponsor. He has a therapist. He has a Tuesday morning standing commitment at the free clinic that he has not missed in 14 months. And he has, in the operating room, the hands he always had. They are, if anything, steadier than before. That is the story of Dr. Elliott Raines, the surgeon with legendary hands, a secret life, and a patient who deserved better, and the long road back to being the doctor he was trained to be. Drop a comment below. Where do you stand on second chances in professions where the stakes are this high? Did the board make the right call? And what about Carmen? What do you think of the choice she made? This one deserves a real conversation. Let's have it in the comments. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, right now is the moment. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like. Share it. We bring you stories like this every single week, and this is just the beginning. I'll see you in the next one.